Thank you.
Tonight on Talking Politics, Democrats in the State House and Senate say they've compromised on a new spending bill that'll give much-needed funding to the state's shelter system. But Republicans are promising to block it. GBH News State House reporter Katie Lannan joins me with what she's hearing on Beacon Hill, and we'll take a look back at the life and legacy of former Massachusetts Democratic Party Chair John Walsh, who launched the careers of former Governor Deval Patrick, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and more. But first, as these mock-ups from the group Climate Central illustrate, climate change is coming for the Massachusetts coastline, and even if we dramatically cut back on greenhouse gas emissions, sea levels will continue to rise and storm flooding will worsen. That's why Governor Maura Healey, in collaboration with the state's 78 coastal communities, laid out her Resilient Coasts plan this week. It focuses on evaluating best practices, finding new funding, and updating laws to protect the state's coastline and mitigate further damage. So what will all of that look like, and what kind of impact is it going to have? I'm joined now by Lisa Berry Engler. She's director of the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management, which is leading the Resilient Coasts Initiative. Lisa, thank you for being here. Appreciate the time. I know that the Office of Coastal Zone Management has been working on resiliency issues for a while already. If I'm correct, you just gave out about $8 million in grants to coastal communities that are working on resiliency strategies. So I'm wondering what this new framework that the governor rolled out and the new role that you're going to be hiring for, what will they allow you to do that you haven't been able to do already?
Thanks for that. Hello, thanks for having me today too. So the Resilient Coast Initiative is a new way of thinking about our climate vulnerabilities along the coast. It will allow us to think proactively and comprehensively and strategically about what our vulnerabilities are coast-wide, and then think strategically about how we can share information, policy, regulatory financing mechanisms across the coast so that we can more comprehensively and really, as I said, strategically think about how we can adapt the whole coast and really get the strength of the state behind the efforts that the 78 coastal communities have been doing more on a town-by-town basis up until this point.
Along those lines, I know that one of the big tasks awaiting whoever is the head of this effort is the creation of coastal resilience districts. Can you explain to me what those are? Because when I was reading through the press release from the Healey administration, I couldn't tell if it meant areas that are contiguous geographically or areas that might be far apart but have similar geographical features or similar, perhaps natural features in terms of biological life that give them some sort of affinity. What will constitute a coastal resilience district?
So first, I just want to say that, many of us are very familiar with the coast of Massachusetts, and we know that the coast is very diverse, right? It's also dynamic. We have areas of the coast like in Gloucester and Rockport that have more hardened shorelines. And then we also have areas of the coast that, like on the Cape and parts of Nantucket, that are more sandy and barrier beaches and dune systems. And then we also have areas of the coast that are fairly well developed, like the city of Boston and the Metro Boston area. And then we have areas that are pretty rural. And so the idea behind the coastal resilience districts is that we would be able to think, again, as I said, about looking coast-wide at what the areas of the coast, where are areas of the coast that have similarities in terms of physical characteristics, as well as infrastructure and types of development, and then also in terms of vulnerabilities to sea level rise, sea level rise, coastal flooding, erosion, even precipitation. And so where can we think about creating resilience districts that aren't necessarily contiguous, as you were saying, but share these characteristics so we can plan for how to adapt within these spaces together and use, this coast-wide vision instead of the more specific town-by-town focus.
Okay. One feature of the new program is, if I understand correctly, that the Mass Emergency Management Agency is going to be leading the evaluation of a statewide buyout program. I think, and again, tell me if I've got this right, I think that would involve managed retreat, which is something that I'm fascinated by, the idea that in some places, it's probably going to make sense to pull back from the coastline, to take existing structures, move them away, to have people who are living near the coast move away. How is that evaluation program going to work, and how tough of a sell so far has the idea of managed retreat been?
Yeah, the Resilient Coast strategy is really going to think about all of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak. We're going to be thinking about different types of financing mechanisms, as I said, different types of regulatory standards, building code standards, really looking across the board at what are the things that we have to make our coast more resilient and ensure that it can continue to provide all the benefits that it currently provides to us today as a Commonwealth. And so in keeping with that, coastal buybacks are indeed something that will be evaluated, and certainly a strategy that we'll be looking to think about in participation and collaboration with the coastal communities. The work that MEMA is doing in their evaluation of a statewide buyout program will help inform those conversations that we have with our coastal communities and stakeholders. We want to know how this type of program is working in other states, and we want to know how it could work here in Massachusetts. And we want to have those answers so that when we have these conversations with our 78 coastal communities, that we can answer questions that they might have about how such a program could work in Massachusetts. You know, this is not going to be any sort of conversation that is, you must do this or you shall do this. This is providing tools so that coastal communities and stakeholders to make informed decisions about how to think about their vulnerable areas on the coast. And then I would also say that this is not a new topic for many coastal communities. We've seen a few communities, even on the Cape, that have looked at opportunities to pull back development from the coast when they've done redevelopment projects. Our Coastal Resilience Grant Program has funded 2 communities that I can think of right now where they did look at the opportunity to pull back parking lots when they were looking to redevelop them. And so we funded these projects and provided technical assistance to help them think about what are the specifics of that evaluation. How far back might you move the parking lot? What are the threats you're thinking about? What's the use, current use and future use of that parking lot in these instances? And so this is not a new topic for communities. They have been thinking about it. And so through the MEMA project and then through Resilient Coasts, we'll be able to help inform the continued conversation around things like buybacks.
I want to ask you about an idea that I've heard floated as I've read and tried to learn about some of the environmental and resiliency issues facing Massachusetts over the past few years. I have heard it suggested by at least some advocates that laws that are currently on the books that are aimed at protecting coastline areas actually make it difficult to take steps that would protect them moving forward, given the new threats that they're going to be facing. Is that a dynamic that the Resilient Coasts initiative might end up delving into, and could it end up driving regulatory change if that's deemed appropriate?
So first I want to acknowledge that some of our agencies that manage the regulatory framework for development along the coast are thinking about and are in fact currently reviewing their regulatory frameworks to see how they should be updated. Some of our regulatory frameworks do not currently include the thinking of climate change and how future sea levels may change, and storm surge may change, and erosion rates may change. And so that's a process that's going on now. And that is something that will be happening in parallel to the Resilient Coast Initiative. Also, through the Resilient Coast Initiative and through the conversations and input that we'll hear from our coastal stakeholders, I suspect that we will see and hear recommendations about how we can think differently about development along the coast and supporting some of these adaptation strategies and how the regulatory framework could help support them as well. And so I see these two tracks or these types of work operating in parallel and informing each other.
Last question for you, which I know you may not be able to answer because this new initiative is just rolling out. Do you have a sense of how much money it's going to cost to do the things that we need to do all up and down the Massachusetts coastline when all is said and done? Or are we not at that point yet?
So if I had the answer to that, I would be, I don't know, I'd go to Vegas or something, right? Like this is the $1 million question, or maybe the $1 billion question, really. I mean, we know it will be expensive. That's for sure what we do know. We know that we are estimating about $1 billion in damages to coastal areas by 2070 under current conditions. So that's if nothing changes. Yeah. So that's sort of a rule of thumb. And so we know we need to be proactive, and we know we need to be thinking about all sources of funding to bring to bear to this issue. And so, federal, that means federal funds, it means state funds, and it means local community funds as well. We know already that we need to be taking advantage of those federal dollars and bringing them back to Massachusetts as best we can. We're already taking steps to do this. Last year, my office secured about $4 million in 2 projects to bring federal dollars to Massachusetts for coastal habitat restoration. We've also applied for funding through the Climate Resilience Regional Challenge through NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Okay, so that actually, all that info you're providing is helpful because it gives a sense of how big the threat is financially, not just existentially, and that there's multiple mechanisms out there to get the funds needed to address it. Lisa Berry Engler, thank you for talking this through. I appreciate it. So happy to be here. Thank you for your interest, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Good luck rolling out the initiative. Thanks. Next up, weeks after the official end of the legislative year, state lawmakers have finally reached a deal on a nearly $3 billion spending bill, which will, among other things, fund Massachusetts shelters overwhelmed by the influx of migrants into the state. But while the Democratic supermajorities in both the State House and Senate have managed to come together, Republicans are not on board. And since lawmakers are working on these issues outside of formal sessions, the handful of GOP lawmakers on Beacon Hill have the power to derail the process. GBH News State House reporter Katie Lannan joins me on what she has been hearing. Katie, first off, how would this $250 million, the supplemental spending bill contains for shelter, how would it be used exactly?
So there are some specific breakdowns there, and one of the key features is it would require Governor Healey and her team to set up an emergency overflow site by the end of the year for families who are waitlisted for shelter. And there's a provision in this compromise bill that would make the rest of the money inaccessible to the administration if they don't get that site up and running. It's a contingent on doing that. There's also some data reporting requirements. They'd have to keep the legislature abreast of what's happening with the shelter system.
And we should mention, this is not the only item in the bill, right, which could play into the politics of how this shakes out. What else is in this supplemental spending bill that's significant?
There's a lot that's in there. It's, as you said, Adam, almost $3 billion. A lot of that money would go to the Mass Health program. There's disaster relief funding for communities hit by flooding and other severe weather earlier this year. One big piece that gets a lot of attention up here at the State House is overdue raises for public workers would be funded by some money in this bill. That's, driven a lot of folks to a point of frustration, waiting for their new paychecks to come in.
Yeah, I think that's an understandable dynamic. So can you explain, we've talked before about how close to irrelevant Republicans are on Beacon Hill, but in this case, they're very relevant. Procedurally, what can they do to keep this from moving forward, and how do you think the Democrats are likely to respond?
So at this point in the legislative calendar, where the legislature is only having informal sessions, all bills have to pass unanimously. So any dissenting vote from a Republican can stop a bill. They also have a procedural move they can use to effectively end a session, to force the House or the Senate to adjourn for the day without considering the bill. So that's what we saw immediately take place the first day, Thursday, that this compromise bill was released by Democrats. And, the Republicans say they're ready to keep it up, and Democrats say they're ready to keep trying. I think there'll be a bit of a staring contest here to see which side is willing to back down first.
Okay, here's something I'm confused by that you, because you know much more about the State House than I do, can help explain to me and any viewers who might also be confused. Why don't Democratic legislative leaders who run the show, why don't they just say, all right, well, we'll go back into formal session because these things are important. We got to get this done. The Republicans are being a pain, but we'll do what we got to do.
We ultimately could see that happen. The Republicans are trying to make that happen. In fact, they want to continue debating the bill in a formal session. But that's a move that's only happened very rarely, 3 times in the last few decades. So it's a big deal, even though it doesn't seem like it would be as you and I are talking. It seems like it might be an obvious solution in one regard, but it's not something that's done lightly or frequently on Beacon Hill. It really is considered a big step. And I don't think the Democrats want to give the Republicans what they want here. They see the Republicans as obstructing this process. Can you explain, and we've got just about 45 seconds left, why is it such a big deal? Is it a big deal because the legislature really likes to sort of keep its time off once they've broken for the year? Or is it a big deal because procedurally, for example, it's complicated to resume formal sessions? I haven't been up at the State House when they have come back into a formal session in an off period. So I don't know how complicated it would be personally, but I think it's more of a political concern. They don't want to give Republicans a win and maybe set a precedent. Very interesting and also very weird. It's one of these things, I think, that from outside the State House, it's just kind of hard to wrap your brain around the logic of all of it. Katie Lannan, good to see you as always, and thanks for the primer on what's going on up there. Thanks, Adam. Finally tonight, if you don't know him by name, you surely know the candidates that former State Democratic Party Chair John Walsh helped propel into office. Walsh, who died last week at 65, is best known as a master of grassroots campaigning who took Deval Patrick from relative unknown to becoming Massachusetts' first black governor. From there, he'd go on to help elect many more prominent Massachusetts politicians, including now Attorney General Andrea Campbell, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and Senator Ed Markey. A flood of tributes have poured in over the past several days from former candidates, colleagues, and friends, with as much praise for John Walsh, the man, as for John Walsh, the political operative, including from my next guests, Sarah Grow, Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Pressley, and Alex Goldstein, who worked with John Walsh on both of Governor Patrick's campaigns. He's now founder and CEO of the communications firm 90 West. Thank you both for taking time to talk about John. Sarah, when he passed away, you sent out a tweet expressing your condolences to John's family and adding, thank you for all of your advice and support and that pep talk at McKenna's that gave me the confidence to step up as Ayanna Pressley's 2018 campaign manager. What, if anything, can you share about what John Walsh told you when he gave you that pep talk at McKenna's?
Well, thanks for having us, Adam. It's such an honor to be able to share some memories of John, and I will never forget that pep talk at McKenna's. I think what we heard at the Celebration of Life this week, too, is that so many folks have incredible stories like that. We were at an inflection point in the campaign. I was a first-time campaign manager, working for someone I admired and respected so much, and I felt tremendous pressure to get it right. I really believed in what the Congresswoman was campaigning for and what we saw as a possibility for representation in the 7th. And I was feeling the pressure. And so I came into breakfast with John with a laundry list of critical decisions we needed to make yesterday. With his signature, just like warmth and affability, he talked me through every strategy question. And then I remember he locked eyes and he said, at the end of the day, Sarah, these are just decisions. You are smart and you are capable enough to make them. And then to add a little levity, he went on to say, plus it's Massachusetts. If you win, everyone will call you a political genius. And if you lose, they'll call you a dirty bum. I will never forget that conversation, and just so consistent with John being so generous of his time to so many up and coming political staffers and taking a chance on us.
You talk about him being generous with his time. He did that not in a capacity of working for the campaign, right? This was a friend-to-friend, colleague-to-colleague chat.
Truly an SOS call, right? That moment as a campaign manager where you say, oh no, I'm in over my head. Who do I trust? And he just really bolstered my confidence and made the stakes so plain. He believed so strongly in the Congresswoman's 2018 campaign. He believed so strongly in her. And that continued during her time in Congress as well, which was such a gift.
I should mention. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Just to your point, he's done that for so many folks. I mean, we heard so many stories about that, just those sit downs, those coffees, and how they were so critical. I mean, they've defined Massachusetts politics for good, in my view.
Some of our viewers will know this. I should highlight it, though, that he ended up endorsing Ayanna Pressley in that campaign when other members of the Massachusetts political establishment were kind of getting behind Mike Capuano, as a rule. Alex, John Walsh, I know, was present at the creation of your creation as a political operative. Can you just recap a little bit the role he played for you as you were getting started in the business you're in?
Yeah, so John was my first boss in politics, gave me my first job as a grassroots field organizer on Deval Patrick's improbable 06 campaign, and then also went on to give me my first job ever speaking to media, which became basically my entire career when he installed me as communication director for the Mass Democratic Party when I had never spoken to a journalist in my entire life, which is very much the John Walsh playbook, which is to trust people, to have more faith in them than they may have in themselves. I think that's kind of was always John's motto. It was his ethos was to help us figure out our path, but believe in us before we could, and allow us to make mistakes and figure it out. And that's what John did for me. And despite beyond our career connections, John really was one of my dear friends, and I miss him terribly. I think in so many ways, John brought this level of optimism in the darkest moments that few can summon. And this is, I feel like I feel like a lot of the periods of the last, decade have been difficult. I feel like we're in a tough period right now. And I've been exclaiming to people that we lost John Walsh at a time when we can least afford to lose people like John. And it makes it feel that much more heartbreaking that he's not here with us.
Sarah, Alex just identified a couple of distinguishing features of John Walsh: believing in people when they didn't necessarily believe in themselves, bringing a sense of optimism in dark moments. Are there other insights he had about politics or convictions he had about the way politics ought to work that you think of as distinctive or unusual?
John meant what he said. And, I miss him so much, as Alex expressed. And I was scrolling through his social media looking for, to kind of hold on to some of those John-isms and just things he would remind us and anchor us in. And he really believed in the grassroots, not in a transactional way. He really believed that if you give people the opportunity to get behind a candidate or an issue-based campaign that's in the best interest of their family and their community, if you give folks that opportunity and you bring the campaign to them, you're going to get phenomenal outcomes for good. And I just hope that's something that we all hold on to in John's memory. I think he also was just so clear about the role of mentorship. I think one of the things that's remarkable about all the folks that have shared memories and testimony from John is they truly come from every walk of life. And specifically, the Congresswoman and I were talking about how many folks of color and how many women were mentored by John. Politics has a lot of barriers to entry for folks, and he just vehemently disagreed that should be the case. He went out of his way to build the pipeline, to invest in diverse candidates, to support women, to be advocates. Someone at the service said, John Walsh's mantra was hire brilliant women and get out of their way. And, he has just brought so many people into these spaces who I know have made my community and my family better off in politics in the truest sense, right? Folks who have advocated for paid family leave and working families and a Green New Deal. And it's phenomenal. I think the impact of John Walsh is not just time bound. We're going to feel it for a whole generation to come in Massachusetts.
Just to drive home your point about his interest in diversifying the political establishment, bringing in new voices, I want to roll a little bit of what Andrea Campbell had to say at the memorial service for John Walsh, very much along the lines of what you just mentioned.
What makes John stand apart from the other so-called political consultants, John never sought me out for business. He never asked me to pay him a penny. Yes, he had clients, but he took pride in making sure that a diverse group of leaders, a varied demographic, also had support and counsel in what they would need to be successful. This Commonwealth, as a result, has more political diversity, and John had an intimate hand in the firsts that are here today.
Alex Goldstein, back when Deval Patrick was running for governor, as someone a lot of people hadn't heard of, a lot of people didn't think could win, was that commitment that Sarah and that the Attorney General mentioned evident?
Oh my God. Yes. I mean, so John, what's so amazing about John is John has a heart, had a heart for outsiders, right? The people that did not have a seat at the table, and pushing everybody was aside to get them that seat at the table. But what's incredible is that once they gained that seat, and John gained that seat in a big way, he became the chairman of the Massachusetts Democratic Party. And a lot of people would use that perch as being, becoming a part of the establishment as a kind of perpetuation of status quo. And John was the opposite. I came into the party with John, and John upended the party. He upended the conventional wisdom of how we do our politics. He upended the ideas of who belongs at the table, as Sarah said, not just in terms of candidates, but also in terms of staff. And I think, creating a space where, I've been telling folks these last week or so that John is probably the only person of serious power in the political structure who never sent anyone to voicemail. Over the course of his 15 years as leading the party and at these highest levels of politics, John didn't care who you were or where you came from. If you had a voice that he believed was worthy of being heard, and he believed everybody was worthy of being heard, he was going to find a way to uplift you and give you that opportunity. And that's I think that is transcendent, and that it will continue for generations. I think there's so many people who are committed to living the way John lived and working the way John worked, and that will be a really big part of his legacy.
Well, my condolences to both of you. Thank you for taking time to reflect on him. And I didn't know him like you did, but it was always a pleasure to talk with him. He was so warm and so thoughtful, and I wish I had talked to him more. Alex Goldstein, Sarah Grow, thank you both. That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And please tell us what you think. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. And sign up for our politics newsletter while you're at it. For now, thank you for watching, and good night.